All right, circling back to our top story, the U.S. and South Korea are hardening what their, quote, ironclad alliance against North Korea.
Leaders from both nations have announced a new nuclear deterrence plan, which will see Washington sending nuclear-armed submarines to dock in South Korea, a first in more than 40 years. The allies have also agreed to step up training and improve information sharing amid increasing threats from the north.
Pyongyang has been ramping up its weapons development, claiming it is protecting itself from plans by the U.S. and the South to change its regime. We are joined by Soo Kim, Policy Practice Area Lead at LMI Consulting. Soo, firstly, how significant is this latest agreement when it comes to South Korea's security and stability? And will it be enough to assure South Koreans, including those who have been pushing for Seoul to arm itself?
Thank you. Well, so I'll have to say that, marking the 70th anniversary of the alliance, there was a lot of pomp and circumstance. So from the ceremonial angle, I think we hit up on all the high points. To your question about whether or not the extended deterrence agreement that we saw today was going to be sufficient to allay concerns in South Korea about the potential for a North Korean nuclear attack, Seoul's ability to defend, as well as the United States' commitment to guarantee extended deterrence. There's a big question, I would say, because looking at the Washington Declaration, it goes into details about what that entails. Essentially, it's the two sides agreeing to engage in more higher level discussions to bring South Korea into the know as to how the United States would be making those decisions. But ultimately, that nuclear decision rests in the hands of the U.S. president. So I think that from the South Korean public's perspective, it's a verbal reassurance. But I think from an action perspective, there might be a gap that needs to be addressed still.
Well, South Korea and the U.S. have long been allies. But how much of this deal is part of the U.S.'s broader strategy to increase its presence and influence in the Indo-Pacific?
So if you take a step back and look at what Seoul and Washington were both trying to achieve through the summit, for Seoul, clearly the nuclear issue was of paramount importance. For the United States, I would say that it would be to engage South Korea into these broader U.S.-China competition, concerns about Russia still going on with the war with Ukraine. And we wanted to see South Korea become much more of an active participant. So from those perspectives, there were things that both presidents, I think, wanted to see. From Seoul's angle, there were things that ironed out, I think, some of the differences. From Washington's angle, I would say that the high notes were definitely hit upon. I would also say that there is more promising, I think, from that perspective, of avoiding just that sole focus on the North Korean nuclear issue and pushing and pulling the South Korea, not in such a negative light, of course, but engaging Seoul so that it does become that global pivotal state that South Korean President Yoon wanted to aspire to when he became president.
And Soo, finding the right approach isn't easy with North Korea. We know that. But how effective would the latest deal be in deterring North Korea from escalating its provocations? Or could it in turn embolden them to up the ante even further and build an even bigger arsenal?
I don't think this particular agreement and the forthcoming actions are going to be able to deter North Korea. If we wanted to see North Korea back down or take softer steps, we would have seen that, I think, a long time ago. If anything, we're seeing Kim Jong-un declare more confidently that his country is a nuclear weapons state. They have also just said that it's not just for defensive purposes, but also for preemptive uses. So there's really no, I think, silver lining with respect to this particular summit and the forthcoming agreements and the actions being able to scope down North Korea's nuclear weapons program. So the nuclear issue, denuclearization, arms control, I think that is still where it is. So the two allies definitely need to be able to show, I think, in more concrete steps. One, of course, to allay the South Korean public's concerns about the growing North Korean nuclear threat, but also a message to Kim Jong-un that they are taking that seriously, but not just verbally, but also through action that is credible to both the South Korean public and also to Kim Jong-un.
Now, you mentioned China earlier. They are the North's only real ally. How will they see these developments? They have running beef with the U.S. on multiple fronts. This isn't going to calm things between the two superpowers or calm its neighbor down either.
I don't think so. Looking at the extensive nature of the joint declaration, the readout at the summit, and how the two leaders went into such detail about the robustness of the alliance and ways that the two countries will be enhancing that. The reaction from China, I don't think, was going to be a deterrent to the steps that the two leaders wanted to take. But of course, any engagement between the United States and South Korea that will reduce China's, let's say, coercive leverage and the ability of China to bully South Korea and other countries to compel them to action that's favorable for Beijing, that is, of course, not going to be good news for China. But I also don't think that it did factor in, of course, the China factor did factor in into the agreement. But at the same time, that was not going to be a deterrent or a discouraging factor to limit and to curtail the scope of the future of the alliance.
Speaking of China, Soo, even before his trip to the U.S., Chinese Foreign Ministry rebuked President Yoon and urged Seoul to act with caution when it comes to Taiwan. During this time of U.S.-China rivalry, is holding on to strategic ambiguity or balance between U.S. and China even possible for South Korea?
I think this is where Seoul is actually coming to the realization that the ambiguity only hurts Seoul's position. Politically and economically, looking at the U.S.-China economic competition, but also ways to engage China in the North Korea issue. I think that South Koreans do know that there are limits as to how much China is really willing to do to bring North Korea either to the negotiating table or to convince Kim Jong-un that the nuclear option may not be the best for the population of North Korea and, of course, for himself. So I don't think that this is something that, looking at China and looking at the ways that the two countries were hoping to build out the alliance, I don't think that this was, it's not something that the South Korean president he was sensitive to it, but I don't think this was something that he would have been discouraged or prevented from doing, because he knows that having seen the ongoing interchange between Beijing and Seoul in the Moon administration, and also right now with the supply chain issue, with the ongoing struggle for democracy versus other institutions, there is a clear answer. And I don't think that South Korea, by staying in this strategic ambiguous position, is actually going to be helping itself both in the short and long term.
Okay, Soo, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for your insight this morning. Soo Kim, Policy Practice Lead at LMI Consulting.